It's your favorite show on YouTube. It's Fluent and Chill with me, Anthony K of Sports Fluent, and the OG, Jermaine. How you doing, man?
Yo, what's happening?
Chilltown Hoops. Chilltown Hoops. I gotta call out TikTok. Get this man back on because, come on, we need it. You can't just hear my voice. We gotta get both sides of the story.
Hey,
and speaking of that, I've been hearing a lot of talk about top 20 lists in the NBA, all-time greats, who's on who's off the list. And I thought, who better than you and I to go through our top 20 and tell the people why. So what I'm thinking we should do is maybe we do like 2, 3, like in a row. You tell me yours, I tell you mine, and then we can talk about it.
Okay.
So top 3. I'll start. Top 3 I've got, and no surprise, I don't think with my top 3. MJ 1, LeBron 2, Kareem 3.
I got James 1, Jordan 2, Jabbar 3.
Okay. So I don't think it's much debate because I think, listen, if you have LeBron or MJ 1, 2, I get it. I still feel very strongly for multiple reasons that MJ's 1. I know you feel very strongly that LeBron should be 1. So we're not debating those. Let's go through the list. So I think we've got the same 3 players, just in a little bit of a different order.
Correct.
I'm going to stop there, however, and say this because it's important moving forward. I do not rank active players in my top all-time lists. I make one exception, and it's the biggest compliment I can give. So when people tell me, and I get this a lot, you hate LeBron James, I make an exception to my rule for LeBron James, and I put him number 2 all time. When you'll hear the rest of my list, not one active player. Right. So if that's a hater, then a hater I be. But that's the biggest compliment I can give any active player because there's not another one. He's the only exception. All right. So 4, 5, and 6. I know you're going to disagree with these because there's one player I know you don't have there. And there might be some Laker bias in mine, I'll admit. So 4 is Magic, 5 is Kobe, 6 is Bird.
Why is Kobe a top 5 player to you?
Kobe, to me, is my favorite player of all time. Is really what bumps him up, and there's fandom that I cannot get rid of. However, I also look at it as he's the second best shooting guard in the history of the NBA, right behind Michael Jordan.
That's not a question.
The only knock I have on Kobe, or someone would have on Kobe, is when he won the first 3 chips, he had Shaq with him, and they'll say, well, Kobe couldn't have won those without Shaq. And that's where I have a problem because I think Shaq doesn't win those without Kobe.
Fact.
And I don't want to, and I'm trying not to, take away from one player's greatness because they're playing with another great player. I'm trying to just look at Kobe. And based on his statistics, his accolades, his wins, and he proved that he could be the best player on the team and still win when he had Pau Gasol. I don't know that Shaq did that. Now I get it. He started to get, it was a different Shaq once he left LA. But when he went to Miami, could be argued that Wade was the best player on that team. So although he won without Kobe, it could be argued that Wade was right. So that's a different argument. So let me get back to Kobe. Go ahead. So based on him being the second best shooting guard of all time, it's been, let's be honest, if we take away the last 15 years, prior to that, it was such a center-centric league that you're going to see a lot more centers because throughout the history of NBA, those were the guys. So I'm also trying to balance that out. So when I say if he's the second best shooting guard of all time, how can I have him, 10, 11, 12, 15, 20 when, if for me, if MJ's 1 and Kobe's the next best thing at the shooting guard position, that's why I put him there. I get it. It might be a little high for most, but as someone who watched every second of every game that he played, again, I have a closer relationship to it.
Right. That's fair. That's absolutely fair. Now, when I look at Kobe Bryant and I look at exactly what you just said about it being a centric league, well, the game wasn't just played through the 5-man. The game was played through the big man, whether it was the 4 or the 5-man. So the idea that Kobe Bryant would be a top 5 player of all time, I mean, I don't have him in my top 10. And that's not because he wasn't a great player. In terms of a talent, he's a top 10 talent, no question in my mind. But in terms of him being a top 10 player and what his career has shown, he's not in my top 10. The guys that are ahead of him did more, in my opinion. I mean, not just did more, in my opinion. They did more, and the numbers show it.
Yeah, fair enough. So 4, 5, 6. Who you got?
I got Chamberlain, Russell, Magic.
Chamberlain's a tough one. So in my next 3, 7, 8, 9, I have Shaq, Chamberlain, and Hakeem. And Chamberlain's so hard for me to judge because his numbers are almost fake, right? Like, it's, when you look at it, it's, people talk about him as this mythological creature.
I'm laughing. The reason why I'm laughing, Tone, is because if you never seen him and you just got numbers in front of you and you just got just paper in front of you, if you never saw him, you'd be like, "There's no way that somebody was this good. No way."
You'd say someone made up those numbers. Put it this way: if he was playing in 1995, in 2005, and you saw just one season, 50 points, 25 rebounds, 48.5 minutes, you'd ask, "Oh, it's NBA 2K." That's the only way someone's doing it. So it's I don't know how to rank him because. Was he just that much better than everybody? Was it a different game? Was he greedy? Because we have heard he was greedy. Like, was he just, and then you look at it, but it didn't equate to a lot of team success, right? It was, and I'll say this, I do knock him for this, and this is actually the reason I have Jordan, right? When I easily say I have Jordan 1.
Right.
Look at the numbers, regular season, and then playoffs. Jordan's numbers go up, Wilt's go down. And significantly down, right? So, and when I rate the all-time greats, hey, what did you do when it mattered? And he wasn't, you know what I mean? He still put up his numbers.
He was on really good teams, and in the playoffs, he did come up short. However, the teams that he went against were really good teams. Now, I can't excuse them losing in the 73 finals to the Knicks. He should have destroyed Willis Reed, who had a torn muscle in his leg. He should have destroyed him. So I can't excuse that. But, I mean, the year before when they played against the Knicks, he averaged 20 and 25 in that playoff series, and they beat the Knicks in 5 games. His team is the only team in the 60s to beat the Celtics. No team in the 60s beat the Celtics except his team. He averaged, even though his numbers went down, he averaged almost 30 and 30 against Russell. Nobody else can say that they've done that. So, not to mention, Chamberlain, the only reason why I put Jabbar ahead of him is because Jabbar had a longer career and he did it longer. That's huge for me, Tone. For a guy to do it longer, that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that you weren't as good. It just means you did it longer. That's all.
Yeah, and I always tell people because people fall in love with someone's peak or their best season, and if I took Wilt's best season versus Kareem's best season, I'm probably going with Wilt, but Kareem just was such a high level for so long, and longevity is a piece. Now, it's not the only piece, right? Because if it was, you'd have Kareem 1. Everybody would have Kareem 1 if it was just longevity.
Correct.
And that's not the case. So I'm curious then. So this is where ours vary quite a bit then. Mine was Shaq, Wilt, and Hakeem. What's your 7, 8, 9?
Bird, Duncan, Olajuwon.
Okay, so I guess the difference for you and I is I have Kobe at 5. You haven't said Kobe yet. The rest of the players are the same. So I basically swapped in Kobe higher, where you have Duncan, and it's number 10 for me is Tim Duncan, and that's where you have
Shaq.
Who do you have? And you have Shaq at 10. Okay,
I got the Diesel at 10.
Have you noticed anyone that hasn't been in my top 10 yet? I'll read it through for you again. MJ, LeBron, Kareem, Magic, Kobe, Bird, Shaq, Wilt, Hakeem, Duncan.
Yes. And the reason why Bill Russell ain't in your top 10, I'm real interested to hear that.
He gets bumped to number 11 for me. And I take – listen, for all 10, and let me say this, and I'll be honest, there is a legitimate case to move around all these players between maybe 3 and 10, you can make an argument. I think 1-2 is pretty locked in, but I think 3 to 10, I think you can actually. I always tell people I don't have beliefs, because when you have a belief, that's it. You'll never change. I have an idea, and ideas can change. So this is my idea of my top 20. So the reason I say that is, like I said, 3 to 10, 3 to 11. I think you can make me a case. You could probably convince me to move him. Why I have Bill Russell just outside of the top 10 is, I think, one, off fame. Now I know he played, and I've defended this. He played in a different era where 44%, 17 points a game wasn't that bad. But I think I knock him for that because, again, I have to split hairs. So offensively, he wasn't as good. And even into the 60s, when everybody now started scoring, he didn't adapt his game to that. And let's be honest, he was on one of the greatest teams in the history of the NBA.
Played 7 Hall of Famers, 7 of them.
And we give accolades. Accolades is part of the puzzle. And you say, oh, well, he won 10, 11, however many chips he won. Well, yeah, but if you swap out him and him and Wilt, are we still talking about Bill Russell as a top 10 player?
I do think we are, and the reason why Tone, and the reason why we are is because they were different players and they were different for what their team was doing. So when you get Russ on that Boston Celtics team, they already had a really good team. He was the difference in what they were doing, both defensively, rebounding, amping up their transition game. Havlicek benefited from that. Sam Jones benefited from that. Bob Cousy benefited from that. They didn't go to him for buckets. However, he was able to score. And the stuff that he was able to do when he was scoring, it was either in transition, it was off the backboard. They weren't going to him a lot for buckets, but they were going to him. And he was converting. But he was the engine that made them go. Without Russ, they're not going nowhere.
I agree with you. Without Russ or not, I don't know to say that they're not going nowhere. Because, again, you don't just take Russ off the team. You have to replace him with another center. So would they be as good? No, I agree. Maybe one of the greatest leaders of all time. However, that's my point, though. You just mentioned Sam Jones, John Havlicek, Bob Cousy, all guys who are so underrated because all we ever talk about is, that Celtics team, Bill Russell. Man, there were some good players on that team. So that's why, again, you can make a case for me, and I'm not saying I wouldn't change it, but that's why for me, I just outside the top 10. So I think your number 11 is
Bryant.
Jerry West. So stop Bryant. At number 11 just for a second. Hold on. Sorry. Because I just want to say, so our top 11 are the exact same 11 players, which I think is very interesting, but the order based on, okay. So let's do that. Let's do 12, 13, and 14.
Number 12 for me is Jerry West. Number 13 is Oscar Robertson. Number 14 is Steph Curry.
Steph Curry at number 14?
Steph Curry is a top 15 player in all time for me. Absolutely.
Wow.
And the reason why he's a top 15 player all time for me is winning is very important. And like I said before, when I talked about being an all-time great, there aren't many factors, but one of the factors, did you win? Did you dominate? Absolutely. But what did that translate to? That's the only reason why Karl Malone is right outside of my top 15. And Moses Malone is in my top 15. For that specific reason right there. Steph Curry, even though he didn't win a finals MVP, they did win. And he was the main reason why they won. And Steph Curry is another reason why, you just got finished talking about Chamberlain, Tone. Steph Curry is one of 8 guys. James, Jordan, Jabbar, Russell, James, Jordan, Jabbar, Chamberlain, Russell, Magic, Bird, Steph Curry. I'm talking Tim Duncan, Steph Curry, to have multiple league MVPs and multiple NBA championships. We don't talk about him. We can't talk about him like I talked about those other 8 guys because he's completely different than any of those guys. He revolutionized the game in ways that most people don't talk about. Now, is he the greatest point guard to ever exist? No, I don't think so. I don't think that he's not in my top 5 point guards because, again, I don't have him.
Yeah, you don't have him as a traditional point guard. Right.
But when we talk about when we talk about the guys that I just mentioned, whenever I talk about Steph Curry, I got to talk about him different than I talk about those guys because he's nothing like them. Zero. Nothing like those guys.
And listen, I'm not suggesting that once he retires and he becomes, eligible. My list is like the Hall of Fame. When he becomes eligible for my list, I'm not saying he won't be, because I think he hit on a couple of things. Multiple MVP, multiple champion. I think he should have been Finals MVP the year that they gave it to Iguodala, but that's a different discussion.
Right.
And the other thing is, he helped. I don't give him credit for this, that, but he helped change, right, the way we play basketball, and he's doing something that no one really ever did before. He's shooting at such a high volume and efficient that. But here's my problem. Would I pick Steph Curry if I'm starting a team? Would I start with him? And that I don't know that. I don't know that I would. So I see your point, and I'll give you mine. So I got at 12. So I had Bill Russ at 11. You had Kobe. Okay, so at 12, I have Oscar at 12. I have Moses at 13, Moses Malone, and I have Karl Malone at 14.
Mm-hmm.
And I get a lot of grief for actually. I'll even tell you 15, and I have Elgin Baylor at 15. And so I got a lot of grief on my top 20 list. Mm-hmm. No one argued with Oscar Robertson or Moses Malone, but they said 14 and 15 for two guys that never won a ring, in Karl Malone and Elgin Baylor. And I think there are two of maybe three players that never won a ring on my list. Mm-hmm. Do you have different? Sorry, you had 12, 13, 14. Let me get your 14 and 15 again, just so I want to see how we compare.
I had Oscar. I had Jerry West at 12. I had Oscar at 13. Steph at 14. I got Moses at 15. I got Karl Malone at 16. And I got Elgin Baylor. And I got Elgin Baylor at 17.
Okay. So I've got Karl at 14, Baylor at 15, and I got Jerry West at 16. Mm-hmm. And so Karl Malone and Baylor are interesting for me because people are like, well, they didn't win a ring. And listen, I'm not giving Elgin Baylor credit for getting to, I think, 7 NBA Finals and not winning one, but he did get to 7 NBA Finals.
Hold on, Tom. We got to flip Elgin Baylor because I got Elgin Baylor at 17. Take Elgin Baylor out. That's my fault. I got Doc at 17. I'm sorry.
You got okay. So that's the thing with Karl Malone. Is Karl Malone? Let's stick with Karl Malone because, like I said, Elgin Baylor, Karl Malone, too. I get the most grief about. Karl Malone, does he not get enough respect because of his kind of off the court stuff? And people don't realize what a great player he was because he didn't win a title.
I don't think it's the off-the-court stuff more than the fact that he played in Utah. If he played in New York, if he played in Los Angeles, if he played in Chicago and he did what he did, it would be completely different, the conversation. We're talking about a guy who for 11 straight seasons averaged almost 28 and 11. I mean, what's the narrative on a guy doing that today? I mean, this dude was first team All-NBA for 11 straight years. We don't have nobody in the game doing that today. Nobody. 11 straight years that this guy was first team All-NBA. We don't have anybody like that today. Nobody. And he won the league MVP at 36.
Keep in mind, when we talk about the points, just look at how many 20 point plus scores were then versus today. Like, I feel you got to weight it different when you can average those numbers because they're like almost everybody and their mother is averaging 20 points a game now, and it was unheard of back then.
We playing this the freedom of movement era too, Tom, where you can rarely put hands on guys. So you're talking about a guy in Karl Malone who revolutionized the 4 spot. I mean, the four man, he was the dirty work guy. He was the guy who rebounded. He was the guy who played defense. We ran the offense through the 5 man, and the point guard was handling that. And the 2 guard, we didn't run the offense through the 4 man. And then comes Karl Malone, who now has got a money mid range game. He runs like a deer, rebounds with the best of them, and now we can run the offense through this guy. And he doesn't get nearly enough. If he had, in my opinion, if he had beat Jordan just one of those times, I think he'd be a top 5 player all time, in my opinion.
I think they missed an opportunity the 2 years that the Rockets won. That's Utah. That's when Utah needed to get in there and win a chip. But that's maybe a conversation.
The problem was, you know who beat him those 2 years? Olajuwon.
Was it? Yeah,
Olajuwon beat him. Olajuwon beat him in the West Finals in '94, and then he beat him again in the first round in '95.
That West was so funny because everyone gives Houston so much credit, but they couldn't get by Seattle. And when Utah had an opportunity, they couldn't get by Houston. Like there was just this weird kind of thing where those teams couldn't get by each other. Okay, so we got so I'm going to go through. Let's just recap the top 15. Yep. I'll do mine and you do yours. So MJ, LeBron, Kareem, Magic, Kobe, Bird. Listen, that's even 6 is I even when I say Bird at 6, I know it's because I'm a Laker fan and I don't want to boost up a Celtic. But
get off it, Tone. Stop it, Tone. Get off it. Give it up, Tone.
The guy virtually averaged 50, 40, and 90. 50, 40, and 90 for his career. And there was a couple of seasons he shot in the 20s. Like when he started in the NBA, it was the first year they had a three-point line. He averaged almost 40%. So, yeah, I get it. So, okay. So 7 is Shaq. 8 is Wilt. 9 is Hakeem, who I still think is so underrated. People do not realize how good Olajuwon was. Duncan at 10. Bill Russell at 11. Oscar Big O at 12. Moses Malone, another one that people forget about how great. I'm going to pause at Moses. I'm going to go back to Moses Malone. Moses Malone at 13. Karl Malone at 14. The Malone, they're not brothers, by the way. I was the Malone brothers at 13 and 14. And at 15, Elgin Baylor. So let me just say one thing about Moses Malone, and then I'll let you get to your top 15, and then we'll do the last 5. Mm-hmm. The worst supporting cast to make an NBA final, or the worst team, I guess, technically, to make an NBA final.
The worst team to make an NBA final. I can make a case for that 07 Cavs team. That Houston Rockets team in 94. Let's see. Dirk's team in 2011. Even though they were together for a couple of years, but yeah, Dirk's team in 2011. That's as far as I'm going. That 07 team. That 07 team in Cleveland. That 95, not 94. I'll take that back, Tone. That's not true. I'll take 94 back because that 94 team, I mean, they started off the season, they were 22-1. So they were rolling. That 95 team, they were in disarray. They were the 6th seed. That 95 team, yeah, the 2007 or that 95 Rockets team.
What if I told you there was a team that made the NBA Finals with a losing record?
I think it was that Houston Rockets team. It was 40-42 in 81. They beat the Lakers. Yeah, they beat the Lakers.
And who was on that team?
Moses Malone was on that team.
And if you took Moses Malone off that team,
they They Cleveland.
Right?
That's who they are.
And no one ever talks about a team. Just think about it: a sub 500 team. I'm sorry, you want to talk about a carry job? And I'm not saying listen, everybody in the NBA is great compared to me, but if you take Moses Malone off that team, there's no chance.
New Orleans. Yeah, they're Sacramento.
And people don't give him enough credit for that, and they forget Moses Malone. So that's why I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so give me your top 15, and then we're going to do 16 through 20, because there's some controversy with mine.
James, Jordan, Jabbar, Chamberlain, Russell, Magic, Bird, Duncan, Olajuwon, Diesel, Bryant, West, Oscar, Steph Curry, Moses Malone.
All right. So there's the top 15 for everybody in case you're keeping track. So now we're going to do 16 through 20. I'm going to give you all 5, and then you give me your 5, and we can talk about it. So that's where I have Jerry West at 16. I have David Robinson at 17. John Havlicek at 18. Mm-hmm. Charles Barkley at 19.
I do have Charles in the top 20.
And my one that I keep arguing with myself with because I think I got to bump him up is Dr. J at 20.
Dr. J at 20. All right.
I feel he needs to be higher, but I think a lot of his success maybe was in the ABA, and I don't know that I hold it against him, but I think the guys that were right before my time, it's really hard to kind of where to rank them. So where do you have your before we?
Well, I got Doc at 16. I got Doc at 16, and we got to once again we're talking about your team success and how important the team was, how important you were to your team's success. I mean, we're talking about a guy in Doc who, his team was in the NBA Finals 4 times in 6 years. A lot of people don't talk about that. His team, he was on the NBA champion. He was on the Eastern Conference champion Philadelphia 76ers 4 times in 6 years. They kept running into the Lakers. They ran into the Trailblazers, but Doc was the signature for what they were doing. Not to mention, Doc expanded the league. The league was in the 70s. It was a drug addict, overpaid, no talent league with these guys. And Doc comes around and he's this high wire act who's charismatic, he's entertaining, and we love him. We love everything about him. And his skill set for that time, it was unmatched. Nobody was doing what Doc was doing. I mean, Doc didn't average, 30 a game, but he is a part of the 30,000 point club. Absolutely, Doc is. So
I'll remind the younger people, there's Kobe, right? Without Michael, without MJ, there's no Kobe.
None.
And people forget this. Without Dr. J, there's no Mike.
There's no Michael Jordan. Nope.
So just remember that when you think about the history of the game, right? Okay, so I'm sorry. So we got Doc at 16.
Doc at 16. Elgin Baylor at 17. Barkley at 18. Barkley is one of 4 guys in the history. I'm sorry, he's one of 5 or 6 guys that's part of the 20,000 point, 10,000 rebound club. Charles Barkley, he's right there with Malone. Malone just did it longer. That's the only difference with Malone. Malone just did it longer. We haven't seen a guy, and I don't think in my lifetime again I'll see somebody like Charles. I've seen guys because the game has evolved. I've seen guys like not Steph Curry, but I've seen guys like Jordan, and I saw guys like Chamberlain because I saw Jabbar. I saw guys like Malone because I saw Kevin Garnett. But I haven't seen anybody like Barkley. I ain't seen nobody like Barkley before Barkley. Not Elvin Hayes or Wes Unseld. None of these guys was like Charles. They weren't transition players like Charles. They weren't ball handlers like Charles. They weren't rebounders like Charles was. I haven't seen anybody like him. And I haven't seen anybody since. So Charles is 18. 19 is Havlicek. And number 20, and I'm going to get killed for this, but I think John Stockton's the top 20 player of all time. I do.
John Stockton.
I think John Stockton is the top 20 player of all times. I do believe that.
Listen, I could see a case because when you're talking about point guards, when you're the all-time leader in assists, I believe, and steals.
That's correct.
Two-time NBA finalist. Are we talking as much about Karl Malone if we didn't have Stockton? And people underrate his defense too, right?
5-time All-League defender. And not only that, Tone, Steve Nash won the league MVP in 2004, 2005. He was 16-12. Stockton went 16-13 for 11 straight seasons, and he didn't sniff the league MVP. That includes going 3 seasons where he was 17-14. Tone, how are we talking? What guy that's running around in the NBA today that's going 17-14? How are we talking about him? What's the narrative on that guy?
Well, just think about it. There's a guy that's not quite there, but Chris Paul, and people are trying to call him one of the greatest point guards ever.
Right.
He's also a good defender and a steals leader, not as many times as John Stockton was. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the narrative, right? Is we forget there's that recency bias. We want to bump up and elevate Chris Paul, and don't get me wrong, Chris Paul's done a phenomenal job.
Correct.
But there was guys before him doing the same thing and more, and that's
more
why
durable too.
And you're right. So and more durable. That's what, how I feel about Chris Paul. So that's interesting. Is there one person outside of your top 20 that you feel like you kind of waver back and forth whether they should be in it or not?
Allen Iverson. Allen Iverson, because Allen revolutionized the game, man. Because I put him in the same category with Steph Curry, where I don't put him in any box. Allen was completely different from all the rest of these guys. I think Allen went 8 years where he was like 27, 28 a game, and it didn't translate a lot to winning. I mean, he did throw that Philadelphia unit on his back, and I haven't seen that since he did that. I have not seen that since he did that. But with that being said, there hasn't been anybody because that's a big deal to me, Tone, when you're talking about a guy who there hasn't been anybody like this before we've seen. Like Calvin Murphy wasn't like Allen Iverson. Nate Archibald wasn't like Allen Iverson. None of these guys were like Allen Iverson. He was completely different than any of these guys. So, to leave Allen Iverson outside of my top 20, that was hard. That was definitely hard.
People don't give him, here's a dude that's like 6 foot, 160 pounds soaking wet, and he carried listen, he had help, right? He had a defensive center. He had to give him a tumble. Don't get me wrong. But if you look at that roster, you weren't thinking NBA final, and he carried them and won a game in LA. You know what I mean? He won a game against the Lakers, which
they weren't picked to go to the finals that year, Tone. Absolutely not. In that conference, they weren't picked.
No, and that's why there's one. So there's one that I got asked about, and I'm curious because you don't have him in your top 20 either. Because I got actually a lot of grief for Barkley, and I'm like, this guy was. Listen, I don't care what where they say he was 6'4", if any. Like, if he was 6 foot, like he was. I stood next with him. I know how tall he is. I'm 6'3". He's not taller than me.
Right.
And he's playing power forward, transition, had hops. Like I think people see him now on TNT, and they see this like overweight kind of joker, and don't realize how good he was. But so I got a lot of grief. They're like, how can you have Barkley and not KG? And that's
what I was ready to say, Tone. Because and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I got to take Barkley off there. He's another one that's outside of my top 20, and KG goes ahead of Barkley.
KG's in there,
and I hate to think that.
So it's interesting because remember how I said it's kind of fluid. I flip flop with them, but I look and I'm like, well, hold on. I get it defensively. Listen, KG has the accolades right defensively than Barkley. Barkley averaged more points, more rebounds, more assists, steals. So every statistical category, Barkley averaged more per game than KG.
Barkley was better, and he was a better player.
It's a better player. So that's why, that's why I struggle with it. But that's why inevitably I put Barkley in there. The other one I wanted to ask you about, and then we got to go. Kevin Durant came up in a lot of the top 20 lists I saw. And again, for me, he's not going to be there because he's not an active player. However, do you have him close to your top 20? A lot of people say he's the scorer of all time. I disagree with that. I would say he's maybe the most versatile. He might be the most. He's in that conversation for versatility, how he can score. I think he's the greatest scorer of all time.
I don't think so.
What are your thoughts?
I don't think he is. But really quick, Charles is a better player than Kevin Garnett. I do think that the separator is the fact that Kevin won Defensive Player of the Year and they won the NBA championship. That's the difficult part for me.
Yeah,
that's the difficult. Now, when we talk about Kevin Durant, I hear a lot of people talk about how Kevin Durant is the greatest scorer of all times, and I think I mentioned this to you before, Tone. You know that Kevin Durant, I don't think he's in the top 20. I don't think he's top 25 all time in scoring. We're going into year 15. We're not.
You said that. I couldn't believe it. I didn't realize he'd been around that long.
Yes, he came in 2007. He was in the same draft class with Greg Oden. So we're going into year 15 with KD. I know that sounds nuts. We're going into year 15 with KD. He's not in the top 10. Top 25 all time in scoring. So I'm trying to understand what the logic is with this guy being the best. Does he have the best package? Now, does he have the best skill set in terms of a scorer? And if that's true, in 15 years, why hasn't that translated? Because Jordan scores more points. Jordan has scored more points than him, and he played less. Malone played. James came in the league 4 years before him. James averages more points. They average around the same amount of points. Jabbar played longer. Okay, I can get with that. Doc didn't play longer than him. Doc's got more points than him. There's plenty of guys on Ray Allen didn't play that long, and Ray Allen has got more points than him. So when we're talking about, actually, Ray Allen did play longer than Ray Allen played 18 years. That's not true. When we're talking, there's plenty of guys on that list who are ahead of him that played 15 years and below. And I don't understand why Kevin Durant is considered the greatest scorer of all time when he's not top 25 all time in scoring. And I can appreciate his skill set, and I can appreciate the package that he brings, because I haven't seen anybody at that size with that kind of skill set. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, that's why I say versatility. Yes. Yeah. But I don't believe he's ever scored more than 60 points in a game. I'm pretty sure he has.
Led the league in scoring 4 times, and so did George Gervin. George Gervin did the same thing.
He's number 31. Let me just give you the guys right above Kevin Durant in all-time scoring for the greatest scorer of all time. Allen Iverson, Ray Allen, Patrick Ewing, Artist Gilmore, Jerry West, Rick Barry, Reggie Miller, Alex English. Now, Vince Carter is there, but he played 100 years. Yeah. Kevin Garnett, John Havlicek, Paul Pierce, Tim Duncan, George Gervin, Dominique, Oscar Robertson, Hakeem, Hayes, Carmelo, Shaq, Dan Issel, Moses Malone, Julius, Dr. J, Dirk, Michael, Kobe, LeBron, Karl, Kareem. Like, there's a lot of players that, don't get me wrong, some all-time greats, but if you just look at, kind of number 20, 30, so starting at John Havlicek and Allen Iverson, he should be past those guys after. I get it. He missed some time, but.
Mm-hmm. And don't forget about Carmelo Anthony. We got robbed, Tone. He should be part of the 30,000 point club. We got robbed 2 years.
Carmelo, I feel bad for Carmelo. Mm-hmm. I feel like he came into a bad situation. And just, we always talk about coaching. Not listening to George Karl, who had him his first year in Denver, or his first years in Denver. But it's just, you needed to listen. He needed to be just reined in, and it's unfortunate. I think that's, if we look at potential and where guys could have been and could have done, I think Carmelo is one of those guys that, man, he had don't get me wrong, he still had a career. But I think it could have been so much better. And I'm going to leave you with this, and because we're out of time, but I still want to ask you this. I started a new series called What If. I was inspired by Marvel. They do their thing, What If, and they do like alternate universes. And the first one I did was What If, and the What If was the worst record in the NBA in 2003 was a tie. It was the Cleveland Cavaliers, as you know, who won the lottery and got LeBron James, the kid from Akron. I think that has a lot to do with the NBA and their lottery system, but that's a conversation for another day. Number 2 was the Detroit Pistons, who basically won the lottery. Well, they didn't win it. It was a trade, and they had to give it up and whatever. But the best they could do was 2, because if they would have won, number 1 would have stayed with the original team. So Detroit, number 2. And then obviously Denver was the 3rd pick. What if Denver won the first pick in the draft, because they had the same record, so the same odds as Cleveland. And they, instead of going with the high school kid, were sold on the collegiate star, Carmelo, and said, no, that's our guy. Carmelo is our guy. We're sticking with him because he's proven commodity. He did it in college. We're not going to take a chance. George Karl might have just said, I'm not taking a chance on a high school kid. Carmelo's the safer bet, which, if you remember back then, listen, the LeBron hype was real, and he's proven it. But back then, you could have made an argument, Carmelo or LeBron.
Absolutely.
So now Detroit's sitting there at number 2. And instead of someone whispering and saying, Darko, they say, you know what? We have a veteran team here. We've got, I believe they already had Sheed, Ben Wallace, Tayshaun Prince, Rip Hamilton, Chauncey Billups. Let's go with the kid, see if we can develop him. And they draft LeBron James with the 2nd overall pick. Are we talking about the greatest team in the history of the NBA and no debate who the GOAT is if he goes to Detroit?
No, I don't think so. And
you think Larry Brown kills him, don't you?
He would have screwed him up. He would have. He would not only would he would have screwed Carmelo up too. I'm so glad Carmelo didn't end up in Detroit. I'm so glad James didn't end up, because Larry Brown would have screwed both of them dudes up. No, I'm so glad that he would have wrecked them. No question. No way. Because I'm looking at that unit, and I'm looking at how far away they were. They were right there. I mean, they had just lost in the Eastern Conference Championship the year before to New Jersey. So they weren't that far away. And to bring in a kid, Larry Brown would have been looking at him like, right there, that you could sit next to me, and he would have screwed both of them up. I'm sure of it.
You don't think he starts as a 6th man and eventually takes Tayshaun Prince's spot at the small forward, and they go ballistic?
We already saw what he did in the Olympics.
Is Larry Brown that stubborn? He's that stubborn?
We saw what he did in the Olympics in 2004. We saw what happened there. So imagine him having his own team. Imagine these kids being on his own team. He would have wrecked James, and he would have wrecked Anthony. I'm sure of it. The best thing that happened to James and the best thing that happened to Anthony was where they ended up. Because getting with Larry Brown, he would have wrecked them. I'm sure of that.
Maybe I should have added to my what if. What if Detroit had a different coach then?
Now we're talking about something different.
That's different.
Now we're talking about something completely different.
All right. Well, that's it for this week's NBA edition of Fluent and Chill. Make sure to check out the NFL edition coming out on Friday. Hey, go give your man Chilltown Hoops a follow on TikTok and TikTok. Unban him. Until next week.
Take it light. Take it.